All right, so now we're going to talk about geographic data. You probably know what geographic data is. Geographic data is locational data, so it's data tied to a place. It's tied to a location where there's descriptive attributes. So geographic data, for example, could be where in the United States do students score the best on AP tests, or in which states do the most students fail AP tests. So we can look at a map and determine, okay, Louisiana, Mississippi, students there fail AP tests more. We could say Florida, California, Virginia, Massachusetts. Those students pass AP tests at a higher rate. Now, this map doesn't say why they pass these AP tests at a higher rate. It just tells us this is what's happening in the world. It gives us the data. It doesn't give us a why or a how or anything. And actually, we could break this down even more. We could let's take Florida for an example. We could break that down to individual regions. We could break it down into individual counties. We could even break it down into individual schools if we wanted to. Data can be gathered through a variety of methods, like organizations and through individuals. Individuals can go out into the street and count cars that pass by, but organizations could find or use some kind of technology to count cars. If you live anywhere where they're doing like a lot of expansion, construction, neighborhood creation, they are out surveying all the time. So here's a concept. It's called toponyms. You're going to hear it pronounced in a variety of ways. All this means is the name of a place. So College Board may throw this word at you just to confuse you, because it's not a normal word. You don't say it in your everyday vocabulary. I don't say, hey, I was there at the toponym the other day. So yeah, it's just the name of a place. It's literally the name of your city, the name of your neighborhood, the name of your state. The United States is a toponym for the country. Earth is a toponym. Mars is a toponym. Goobertown is a toponym. Portland, Maine. Portland, Oregon. Chunky, Mississippi. Toponyms. There you go. Geographic data could be also physical data, so it could be data about the actual physical geography, the topography of the world. So this could be climate, it could be soil, it could also be temperature, rainfall, it can be mountains, it could be different types of species that are living in different areas. There's a lot that we could interpret and use with physical data. But it could also be thematic data, which is our data that revolves around a phenomenon, a trend. And typically we give more quantitative measures. But this is more thematic data. So it shows just popular brands and corporations throughout the United States. What's the states kind of known for? A little bit. California, where Silicon Valley is, they're known for Apple. In Florida, where we have the beaches and people without clothes on, Hooters. Yeah. And then in Oklahoma, you drive 20 miles, you find a Sonic, and there's nothing else in the whole town. Here's another thematic map. This is a isoline map, I believe. So it's showing just flood numbers events. So it could deal with natural phenomenon, but it's still showing thematic data because we're looking at quantitative information. Another thematic map, this is a dot distribution map. It's showing the number of Dairy Queen locations in the United States. What can we interpret from this map? There's more Dairy Queens in the eastern side of the country than the western side. They're more dispersed in the west. They're more clustered in the east. Look at Texas. It's kind of like a straight line just goes through it. And it just starts going on less and less because nobody lives in western Texas, let's be honest. So we're going to talk about some technologies now. Some of these you might be a little familiar with, and some of these you may have never heard of before. So first we're going to talk about satellite navigation systems. So these are just systems that use satellites up in space to provide geopositioning, like where you are in the world. They use a small electronic receiver to determine a location. They use your coordinates, your longitude, your latitude, but also your altitude, how high you are from the ground. And they do this at a very high precision, so it's very, very accurate. And they use time signals transmitted from the satellite. So what does this mean? So they determine your location very precisely at a specific point in time. So they're not like, let's say I was in South Dakota last week. The satellite's not going to say I'm in South Dakota right now. It's going to say I was in South Dakota last week. And these satellite navigation systems can be used for your GPS. They can be used for navigation. They can also be used for timing different events, as well as remote sensing. And remote sensing is just a very fancy word of taking images with a satellite. So Galileo is the European Union's satellite navigation system. Russia has one, China has one, the US has a GPS satellite navigation system, but the Galileo was created by the European Space Agency just a few years ago to provide a very high precision positioning system so that Europe can have their own navigation system without relying on another service like the US GPS. And this provided a whole new global search and rescue system, something to give it some memory. And recently, an anonymous EU official claimed that US officials imply that they might consider shooting down Galileo satellites. I guess they can't take the competition. So yeah. Let's talk about global positioning systems. What's a global positioning system? That sounds fancy. GPS is a global positioning system. Yes, now you know what GPS actually stands for. The GPS in your phone is a global positioning system. And they're used to identify absolute location, direction, and distance. So these concepts, yes, they have purpose. So what's the use of a GPS? You could get directions to your grandma's house for cookies or to go to White Castle. You could be traveling down to the Titanic if you do it safely. You could be doing search and rescue operations. You could be mapping fields for crops. You could be geocaching. I haven't been geocaching in years, and making this PowerPoint, it kind of reminded me how fun it was. You could be optimizing pizza delivery times and routes, find which ways are quicker, which ways have traffic in certain areas. They can identify the absolute location with the traffic. They could be dispatching emergency response units. They could tell you the quickest way to get there. They could tell you the distance that you are. So the distance will help determine which fire station goes out to put the fire. They could also be tracking tagged wildlife and tracking the numbers of wildlife to see if certain species are in threat of extinction or not, or if they're migrating. We could also be doing drone navigation as well. There's a lot of uses with global positioning systems, and it all comes down to identifying absolute location, direction, and distance. Now, there are some pros and cons to using a GPS system here. This is kind of a diagram to show how they work a little bit. So these pros can include geographic mapping, as well as just navigation, precision. They're very accurate. Tracking and monitoring. Monitoring you, people, events, as well as being very time accurate. You can conserve the wildlife. Some cons include technology dependence. What happens when the technology goes down or it breaks? What if the signals interfered here? What if these GPS satellites malfunction? They can also be very complex. I'm sure the original GPS was not as simple as Google Maps. There's also be security vulnerabilities. What if someone hacks into a GPS? They could see a bunch of people's locations, and that's just not safe. Now let's talk about remote sensing. Remote sensing is the acquisition of information. So you're acquiring information about something, usually a place or an object, and you're not making direct contact with it. So I can get information about India without actually having to go to India. And most of the time this is done with satellites and taking satellite images. So for the most part, remote sensors collect this data by detecting the energy that is reflected from the Earth. There's a lot of science behind this and a lot of math. And these sensors are usually mounted on satellites, but they can also be mounted on aircraft. So this is a satellite image. It was created through remote sensing. And what usage could we have of this satellite image of New York? What possible reason would we have to take this? Well, we could see how dispersed the land use is. It's not. It's very clustered. We can see if there's any green areas. Yes, there are. There's some environmental promotion here. We can see, okay, how big are the buildings? There's a lot of tall buildings, but there's areas where there's not a lot of tall buildings. We can see if there's any uniform or spontaneous development. It seems that the high-rises are a little more spontaneous, but if you look towards the southwestern part of the image, it's a little more uniform, kind of like a grid-like pattern. I feel like I just push buttons a little bit there. We could see if there's a lot of traffic for this time of day. We could see that there's roads, and if you look in the northeastern region, there's it looks like it'd be an interstate. And yeah, there's a good bit of cars, and it looks like they're traveling in the same direction. So traffic in that direction is a little more heavy. We could see if there's any damage from environmental events if we would like to. We could also look at the water and see how clean it is. That's pretty important as well. There's a lot we can take away from this image. We could actually look at the architecture and determine the culture. Maybe there's a multicultural significance, or maybe it's very modern architecture. So yeah, very cool stuff. We don't see a lot of agriculture. It's very urban. We can determine cost of living's high. I just keep going on and off. I'll shut up, I promise. Here's another little diagram here. It kind of tells us the usage, though, for satellite imaging. So satellite imaging and remote sensing can show us different organisms. It could show us if there's any viruses going on with our crops, or if there's anything wrong with the canopy or the whole landscape. Of course, we could look at damages. We could look at spots maybe that the farmers missed, or they did too much of, so it doesn't look like it's growing properly. We could look at any diseases that are being passed through to the plants as well. We could look at areas that need irrigation. There's a lot that we could look at related to our agriculture with remote sensing. Now let's look at a GIS, Geographic Information System. You will see this pop up somewhere on the news, maybe with like National Geographic, sometime in the future. And most people don't know what it is. They just kind of nod their head when they read GIS, and they're like, yeah, I know what this is. They don't know what it is. You're going to learn what it is. So without even reading the little stupid statement here, what are we looking at here? So we have the world. You live in the real world. And the world you can take out and create layers. You can make the ocean a layer. You can make the layout of the city just a pure layer. You can make the roads the layer. You can make the physical grass and dirt and in mountains a layer. And then you can make the buildings a layer. You can make everything else one layer as well, your full view, if you'd like to. There's a lot that you can make out of these layers, and it varies at which GIS you're looking at. So, yeah. So we take the world and we comprise it into layers, and each layer provides us with a lot of valuable data. Like the routes layer looks at our roads and the design of the city. We can literally just look at that and see in areas where there's a lot of space for roads and areas where there's not a lot of space for roads. We can see where there's a lot of buildings. Maybe, okay, that's maybe a little more walkable area, per se. If there's a lot of roads clustered together, a lot of alleys, we could say, okay, this is very urban living. Look at the elevations and see what kind of geography we have there. Maybe there's a lot of mountains, or maybe it's very flat. Maybe we're in New Orleans, which is underwater, for one. If the water bodies layer is above the elevation layer, then yeah, that could be a big sign that they are prone to environmental damage. So systematically, a GIS is a computer system. It captures data, it has input of data, it analyzes the data, and it displays the geographic data. And you can analyze it in layers. It captures it in layers. It doesn't take a big picture of it like a satellite image does. So here's another little image, a little diagram to show you what a GIS kind of does. So it takes very simple data, very simple layers, and it just adds more. So the buildings get a layer, the vegetation gets a layer, the routes, like the roadways, get a layer, and then everything comes together to build the world, the real world. This is a GIS of the University of Central Florida. So we can see here that we have the actual map, that's one layer, and then we have a layer for parking. We have a layer for food. If you wanted, we could have a layer for shuttling and traffic. We have a layer for EV charging for your Teslas. So you use GISs on a daily basis, probably, for the most part, or your parents do. So a lot of people use GIS on a daily basis. I use a GIS on a daily basis. So what's a use of a GIS? Well, you could use it for urban planning, like with zoning and land use, as well as where you could put infrastructure. You could use it for telecommunications, like 5G. Look at where areas need 5G, or what areas are more clustered that you might need a little more 5G support to support that many people. You could be tracing pollutants if you'd like to. You could be just analyzing the physical landscape, seeing, okay, where are the mountains located really? Because if you build a big city along mountains, you just maybe want to see what's going on with the mountains. You could see where the rivers are. You could also be using this for insurance company decision making, which is a pretty big deal, because that means that they have to find a way to save money. You can use it for weather forecasting. Some areas may look a little more predictable to flooding. That's a big thing. That also has to go with the insurance company decision making. If they're insuring a flood zone, they're going to charge higher rates. Now, does a GIS require an absolute location like a GPS? Yes, it does, because we're talking about geographic data, and geographic data is tied to a location. So you use a GIS a lot, probably, if you use Google Maps or Apple Maps. So yeah, these are examples of GIS. They're considered online mapping. So you can take layered data here. You could have a picture of the actual terrain, or you could do a little more of a diagram focus if you'd like. You can choose if you want to have businesses show up, interstates show up if you would like to. You could show different routes as kind of the GPS incorporation in there as well. So Google Maps is a great example of a GIS. Now, what are the pros and cons to using a GIS? Well, the pros include enhanced decision making, as well as data integration. You can get all of this layered data into one. You can communicate with other people. You can manage your resources. It also can save costs depending on how you use the decision making. It would also be great for environmental analysis, because you make the actual physical environment a layer and analyze just that specific layer. You could also do need-based customization. That kind of goes back to the Google Maps here. You could use it for your own specific needs to see where places are, how you can get there, that sort of thing. And then the cons include, of course, technology dependence, what happens when it goes down. It could also be very complex if you have a lot of layers going on. You could use it for data collection and integration challenge. Yes, that's a pros, but it's also a cons, because how are you going to collect that data? And you have to collect a lot of data. I mean, look how much, I can't even imagine how Google Maps collected all that data. There could also be some inconsistencies, and it might not have to be put up to date every few years, or depending on when the landscape changes. What if the environment changes? What if a volcano erupts and destroys a big area? The GIS will then be inaccurate. So online mapping and visualization, this is just a brief little thing here. So online mapping and visualization is typically done with a GIS, and what it does, it takes the layers and it combines them all into one integrated map here. And it's typically done in a 3D manner, so you can visualize what an area looks like. This is Manhattan. I could tell just by looking at the little area, and the island right below it says Statue of Liberty, and because it's in the corner it says Manhattan Population Explorer. But besides that, this is Manhattan, and we can kind of visualize what Manhattan looks like, how tall some of the buildings are. We can kind of get a reference at where Central Park is, where are the tallest buildings located, where are some of the smallest buildings located. We could actually look at where the borders are. Where does Manhattan start and where does Manhattan end? We could see where is it located near water. So there's a lot of uses here with online mapping and visualization. Now let's talk about collecting spatial information. There's a little bit of information here, but we just gotta look at how you can collect spatial information. So this could be through field observation. Just going out and watching animals is a field observation. Watching how people interact. This is done by a lot of psychologists. They actually just see what normal behavior is like in day-to-day life. And that could be very useful for geography as well. They could also collect spatial information from media reports, as well as travel narratives, like the travels of Marco Polo. He described what China was like during their very prosperous Song dynasty, I think in like the 1200s, or so around that time. Travel narratives could just be through Yelp as well, leaving a review for a restaurant saying, they made my salad great. So you could say, this place has salads. People like the salads, that sort of thing. You could also be doing it through policy documents. Policy documents can tell you where certain properties start, where certain properties end. You could also just do it through taking photographs of area and say, okay, in this space there's a lot of damage from natural disasters. This is from the Joplin, Missouri tornado. You could also just do landscape analysis. You could literally just go out and look and say, this is rural, this is urban. Or you could look at a picture and do landscape analysis as well. We don't have the whole landscape of Joplin, Missouri, but we got a little chunk of it here. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.